Hello, and welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged. I'm your host, Adam Legg, and in this series, I talk to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-Suite, what keeps them up at night, their perspective as a leader in their industry, and their outlook on the future. If you find this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving us a quick review and rating. Now, on to the show. Some people I know sure take on a lot. Irfhan Rawji is one of those people. He'll tell you more about his career path, but I've known him for many years. He's led investment growth of a large fuel and retail company. He started a disruptive technology talent company. He's managing partner of a venture capital firm and chair of many initiatives across technology and immigration. He's incredibly busy and intense, but always human, approachable, and highly engaged and supportive. BCA has been the recipient of his intelligence and thoughtfulness through his involvement in many initiatives and activities. We're both alumni of the Sauder School of Business at UBC, and it is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Irfhan Rawji. Irfhan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Adam. It's a huge honor to be here with you.
Well, we're thrilled. You've made some time in that incredibly busy and intense schedule you've got, my friend. For listeners who don't know you, can you introduce yourself? Give us your elevator pitch of, man, the lot of hats that you wear.
Thank you for that, Adam. I do wear a lot of hats. I think it's because I have ADD. I've always had that. I think, as a child, I was always interested in many things. But yeah, you kind of summarize it. I am the managing partner of Relay Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital firm. I'm a managing partner of Realize Capital Partners, which is a fund of funds in social finance. And I'm on multiple boards, including executive chair of Mob Squad, which is the technology talent company you referred to that I helped found about 5 years ago. So I spend my time in multiple places. I call myself an investor, an entrepreneur, and a community volunteer.
Many times I speak with you, you're in Ottawa, you're in Calgary, you're in Toronto. Where do you find yourself mostly these days?
On my phone, a lot. But on planes, a lot. I just got back yesterday from Toronto. I know I spent a lot of my time in the US with my work with Mob Squad and with Relay. I spent time in Toronto, Edmonton, Vancouver. I mean, it's all over North America and at times also in Europe for one of my nonprofit boards. I was just looking at last year and I think I was on something like 75 flights. So one of my New Year's resolutions is to get more efficient on when I get on a plane to go somewhere to try and stack meetings so I can spend less time inefficiently sitting in the air.
I think when I first met you, you were with Parkland, and then you moved into Mob Squad and technology. How did you really make that shift into the tech space? That seems to be where you're spending a lot of time with Relay Ventures and all of those sorts of things. How did you make that pivot from gas and refining to technology?
Yeah, I spent most of my career in asset management, so it's not as crazy as maybe it sounds. I was on Bay Street and Wall Street in private equity and actually sold a company to Parkland Fuel Corporation in 2009, which is how I met Bob Espy, who then ended up recruiting me to come to Calgary and come work with him. And so I really worked in the corporate strategy, corporate development, and investor relations groups with him there. So, the skill was transferred into an operating company. I did that because I wanted to learn really how to be an operator. And Bob really helped me understand what it took to be a CEO, because my career started as a consultant and then as an investor. And in those roles, you didn't really operate anything. You're on the board, you're giving advice, but you weren't really an operator. And I really wanted to have that skill set because I thought it would make me a better investor to understand how to be an entrepreneur and operator. In 2015, when my first child was born, I decided to go on my own and start investing capital that I'd saved over time. And that's how I met the guys at Relay Ventures. We co-invested in a company together. And, they tried to convince me to join them, which I eventually did. And now I've become managing partner of the fund, a few years later. People ask me how do you get into venture capital, because there's not many roles in venture capital in Canada, at least. And, my joke is that company that Relay invested in and I invested in, actually, I was the board chair of that company, and that's where I met Johnny Albright, who's now my partner. That company went bankrupt. So my advice is, invest a lot of your money in a company, have it go bankrupt to meet a venture capitalist, and maybe you'll get your way into the field.
That's risky advice, but you've got a good path there.
Something good came of it. I was like, this is a terrible situation, but something good did come of it. And I'm a bit of an optimist, and even in bad situations, my friends tease me. They're like, Irfhan, you have a way of falling uphill. Like, bad things happen to you and somehow it gets better. Like, what's going on over there?
I love the ability to fall uphill. Irfhan, people love to hear the journey story of our leaders, and you've touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear Irfhan. He's finished high school. He's got the whole world in front of him. What are some of the thoughts and decisions that you made to where you are today?
Okay, so there's the easy way of being the CEO and the hard way. So let me start with the easy way of being a CEO. You go to Staples, and you print a business card, you just say CEO, and you're instantly a CEO. I mean, anybody can do it, really. Not so difficult. One of my coaches actually, gave me that advice. He's like, it could have been easier this way. I graduated from high school, I decided to go to UBC because I grew up in the Greater Vancouver area and family was important to me, so I wanted to stay close. I ended up going to the Sauder School of Business, not because I was really thoughtful around what I wanted to do. I just knew that I enjoyed like finance and math, and that was the easiest way to get a degree. So I was like, what's the easiest way to do this thing that my parents want me to do? So I got a finance degree. I ended up, this was 2000 I graduated, and that was like the height of the dot-com bubble. I ended up working in management consulting for what was called then Anderson Consulting, became Accenture. 9/11 happened, and suddenly everything got slow and got boring. I was still working, but like suddenly there was less interesting things to work on because the economy really slowed down. And so I'd run into somebody that has now been a longtime mentor of mine and co-investor with me, actually, who convinced me to go to Harvard Business School, and I ended up applying and getting in and going there. At the end of that, I really wanted to come back to Canada. I'm patriotic as a Canadian. That's part of why I spend so much time thinking about things like immigration and how to build a better Canada. Couldn't find a job in Vancouver, so I ended up in Toronto at McKinsey, which was great training. And found myself in private equity. A headhunter called one day, and I remember meeting the guys at Birch Hill Equity Partners. I'm like, I'm not sure really what you guys do, but you seem like really nice people, so I'm going to try it. And that's how I got into asset management. I went from there to Onyx, and then, as I mentioned earlier, Bob convinced me to come to Calgary. And sort of that's been the story of my career until meeting the guys at Relay. And Mob Squad was a creation out of Relay because we realized there was a talent shortage in the US in our portfolio companies, and we needed a solution for that because our companies weren't growing as fast as we needed them to grow because they couldn't get talent. And we figured out that if it was good enough to be a solution for our portfolio, it could probably be a solution for other people. And that's how we built a business out of that. And since then, I've spent more time, graduating into the chair role from the CEO role at Mob Squad, and now spent more time sort of building out our next platform of growth at Relay, which is our social finance fund of funds.
You've got a remarkable portfolio of career experience, of volunteer experience, and leadership. Irfhan, what's your leadership philosophy? What type of leader do you want to be remembered as?
I think if I get to answer that in two ways. The first is I think it's really important to leave behind great sustainable results. And so thinking about how do you make sure that this thing that we're working on actually sticks when you're not there. And I've been fortunate to have opportunities in multiple organizations and nonprofits where I can look back and say that thing we worked on actually worked and it's still there. And so I think about that while we're in the moment of how is this actually going to stick. And the second, and I'm not sure I'm good at this, but I'd like to be known for it, so I'm working on it, is to be a good people developer. It makes me super happy to see when people that I have worked with and hired and coached, have grown their way into bigger careers with bigger opportunities. Like one of my most proud things is looking at the team at Mob Squad, many of whom I hired into junior roles who now run the company, 5 years later. And I don't have to spend much time doing it because they're doing it. And I know they're doing it really, really well because I've watched them do it and been able to coach them into it. And so, those two things, if we can do things that are sustainable and that are impactful, and you can build people so that they can achieve their potential, those are things that inspire me.
A lot of times leadership is the bruises that you learn along the way and some of the role models, a combination thereof. And you earlier admitted to falling uphill. What can you ascribe to that? Is it just a resilience or just a set of skills or capabilities that enable you to fall uphill? Anything you learned in your leadership journey that enables that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. So resilience is super important. So as an entrepreneur, I say that you really need three things to be a really great entrepreneur. You have to be really, really smart. You have to be really, really hardworking. And you got to be resilient because things break all the time. Like the plan's never the plan. Like I wake up in the morning every day and I'm not sure where I'm going to get punched in the face today, but I know I'm going to get punched. Like I know where it's coming from, but something bad will happen, right? When you're invested in as many things that I'm invested in and working on all the things I'm working on, like everything is not great everywhere all the time. Something's not great today somewhere. And the ability to sort of take it and then do something positive with it and, like almost like a jujitsu move with it, I think is really, really important. I know in entrepreneurship, why are those three things important? Things are going to change. So if you're not really smart, you're not going to figure out how to alter your business or your plan or your structure to make it work. If you're not really, really hardworking, you're going to get beat, right? It's all about execution. So if someone's willing to work harder than you, they're going to be first to market or take share or take your customers. A dangerous combination is if you're not really smart, but you're really hardworking. Because then you're going to run in the wrong direction really, really fast. That's problematic. And an effective combination is being really, really smart, but not hardworking, because you're theoretically right, but the tree fell in the forest, right?
Yep.
And resilience is important. Resilience is important because it's so hard to get the flywheel going and things break all the time. And so, I think falling uphill is a combination of resilience and creating your own luck, right? Like it's luck, there is a recipe for luck. And to me, it's if you work really hard, you work really smart, you are testing yourself to make sure you're always doing the right thing. And that's hard. You're not always going to make the right decisions. You look back and say, I shouldn't have done that. But hopefully you're testing yourself to say, in the moment, this feels like it's the ethical right thing to do by people or by my other stakeholders or the multiple tests, your investors, the multiple tests you should apply to that. And you're paying it forward. So if you're doing a lot of work in a really smart way and you're trying to do the right thing and you're being helpful, those things somehow combine into a recipe that creates luck. And so if bad things happen, but you have luck, you fall uphill if you're resilient.
Yeah, what a great recipe. I love that. I love that, knitting together all those elements and the recipe for luck and falling uphill. I imagine you get asked many times for your advice from young entrepreneurs and professionals. What advice do you give people when they're starting their career? What do you encourage them to do or even not do?
Yeah, I think when you're starting your career, so the first thing is I tell everybody what I just told you, that recipe. And people are like, why are you telling people your secrets? I'm like, because executing this is really, really hard. So if they can do it, good for them. I don't think I'm giving away anything. And if they can, and they remember me for helping them think through that, that's a good thing. Something good will come of that, right? The other thing I say to people is it really, really matters to have sponsorship early in your career. Not mentorship, sponsorship. That's somebody very senior in whatever organization you're working in that's pulling you up, that's creating opportunity for you. And that matters because if you can create an inflection point in your career where you're moving faster earlier, the line of your career, both in terms of opportunity, in terms of skill development, in terms of compensation, it just gets you there faster, right? If you put a 10% kink in your career on that line when you're 22 years old, it's better than when you're 32 years old or 42 years old. So early on, if you can find a sponsor that really matters, it doesn't matter what your title is, it doesn't matter what the company does, it doesn't matter how much you earn. Get a sponsor and make sure there's any glass ceilings for you, and you will go very quickly, very fast, very early, and that will result in very, very good things. And so I do coach people around, really thinking about that. And they always ask me, the next question is, how do you find a sponsor? And that's where the magic is. That's where the fairy dust is. And the trick is the best sponsors are people that you somehow click with, you meet randomly, but they see themselves in you. They see an early version of themselves because psychologically, subconsciously, we want to help ourselves. And if I see somebody that looks like me, I just want to help them.
Yeah.
Even if they don't ask.
I love that. That's perhaps something I've been struggling to articulate, but the notion of sponsorship and championing someone in a more junior role in an organization. I think back on some of my experiences, and I had a number of supporters and champions and sponsors in my career, and I think that did accelerate my trajectory for sure.
And I bet you there's two things that are true about those sponsors that you had. And this is a filter for how to find a sponsor. I bet you that they were very successful for their age and stage, is my guess.
Yep.
And I bet you they had a sponsor. And so there's a unique desire to pay it forward, right? So people that are not highly successful typically aren't sponsoring others, but they're doing it because they were like, this happened for me.
Yeah. They remember the shoulders upon which they stood on and helped grow their career for sure.
100%.
Yeah. Let's move to Realize Capital Partners, which describes itself as a fund of fund manager for the Government of Canada's Social Finance Fund. It's a joint venture of your firm, Relay Ventures and Rally Assets. Help us understand, what is the Social Finance Fund?
Yeah, the Social Finance Fund was a initiative of the Government of Canada to try to create asset managers that would back companies that are engaging in not single bottom line initiatives. So a company that exists to both make profit, but then also have some social outcome that's good. Maybe they're chasing down one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a primary objective of that business. Mob Squad would be a socially oriented business, right? It's a B Corp. It's making money, but it also is trying to make Canada be a much better economy by bringing the best labor to the country. And so there's a social outcome that's good there. The number of managers of assets that are looking to fund companies that are doing this is pretty de minimis in Canada right now. And so to catalyze the creation of multiple asset managers, the government said, smartly, let's not do this as the government. let's get people that actually understand how to invest, that actually are themselves fund managers, to invest this money in other funds to try to catalyze that outcome. It's not dissimilar to what the government did about 10 or 11 years ago when the venture capital ecosystem was nascent in Canada. There was almost virtually no venture capital in Canada like 15 years ago. And they looked at that and they said, that's not good for our innovation economy. And they created a venture capital action program, the venture capital catalyst initiative. There's been 2 of those where they said, we're going to put up capital that will help catalyze private capital to also be in the sector. So specifically for Realize Capital Partners, which is the JV that you alluded to, which is a fund that I'm managing partner of, we received a $135 million commitment from the government of Canada to support this initiative, with the commitment to them that we would raise about $270 million of private capital alongside that to create a $405 million fund of funds. And that fund of funds will invest across asset classes, private equity, venture capital, growth capital, real estate, infrastructure, debt, in fund managers doing those things to back companies that are trying to get those outcomes. And so we just launched the organization mid last year. We made our first 9 commitments just around Christmas to different fund managers across Canada in various areas, including here in Calgary with a 51 Ag Tech Fund. We're a large limited partner investor in that fund and is super excited about what Allison and her team over there are going to do with that capital. And, in many ways trying to catalyze others to join us and backing people like Allison to get her fund off the ground. Because, unless you get a certain size as an asset manager, like there are economies of scale in this. You can't have like a $10 million fund and have it be very economic or frankly sustainable. You need to get to a minimum size, and we're hoping to catalyze others to come alongside us. And it's attractive in that we structured this particularly such that the private capital is the last in capital and first out. It gets a 6% preferred return before the government gets their capital back. There's a lot of things that make this, from a risk-adjusted basis, attractive to private investors. And so we're in the middle of, or in the beginning stages of raising that capital. And, we think that the point of this is to de-risk it. So the risk-adjusted returns are really good for private investors. So they get a taste of the sector that they maybe haven't been exposed to before and learn about it, such that if the government, over time pulls back its support, we've actually created a sector in the investment landscape that will achieve the social objective that the government has here, but while also achieving the private objective of returns.
Yeah, I love the VCCI Vicky fund model, right? You get the private capital is first in, first out, or last in, first out. You get some premium return guarantees, and that enables people to feel comfortable investing in some of that space that might be new.
Trying something new. Yeah, just trying something new. Like, we'll make it easy this time. And, the returns, I think, risk adjusted are very, very attractive. And frankly, I think for many investors, we are all looking to say, okay, well, it would be good for my capital, my investments, and whether it's my family office or my personal holdings or, corporations, I'd like for this to do good, not just do well, right?
Yeah, exactly. The fund, Realize Fund 1 has a 4-pillar investment strategy. I wonder if you could break that down a little bit for us and tell us what you're looking for in terms of some of the funds you're investing in.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking across different types of managers. So if you look at what we're trying to do like some community investing. So at the local level, like let's say the Calgary Foundation as an example wants to do a housing project and give, concessionary rates to build socially affordable housing in the city, which has a social outcome. Well, maybe we would participate in that. We're looking at building new managers. And so, is there an Indigenous venture capital firm in Canada? If there isn't, can we be an anchor investor to help catalyze that by taking people that have the skill set that are maybe working at CPPIB or AIMCO or somewhere else and say, well, why don't you do this on your own? And we'll support you doing that, because we know that if you have somebody from an equity deserving community, because of their context and lived experience, they're more likely to invest in those equity deserving entrepreneurs. That's an efficient way to do it. So we have to support the creation of that. We also want to scale managers. I mentioned this already. There's certain managers that have started that are in the social space, but they had a small de minimis $10 or $20 million fund. Well, we want that to be 50 or 100. How do we help catalyze that? So, community investments, building new managers, scaling current managers, and then directly participating with our general partners on a co-investment model when they need additional capital as their investment scale.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I hope it hits the targets you've got in terms of the private capital raise, and really an important set of investment vehicles and funds, I think, to generate some broader community returns. So applaud you and your partners.
And we're hopeful. I mean, it's a startup, and I like that kind of space. I like the risk of it. I like the opportunity that comes with it, and I'm excited about it. I mean, this marries, Adam. You said it early on. You've known me for a long time, and I've spent a lot of my time in the private sector. I spent a lot of my time in nonprofit land, and I spend my time also thinking about government policy. And when those sectors, when government, when private, and civil society come together, that's where magic happens. That's where change happens. That's where catalytic things occur. That's what Realize is going to do. Like, I spend my day now doing what I love, which is the intersection of government with private investors and civil society. Civil society inspires us to what the answers should be. The private market, if it gets a return, makes that sustainable. And government can catalyze both those things and create the policy framework for difference and change. And that's the magic of this space that we're in right now.
That's the three legs of the stool, right? To make it all happen. Realize has also signed up for the 50-30 challenge. And so for those who may not be familiar with it, maybe share with us, what is the challenge and why was it important for Realize to be part of it?
Yeah, through, society, 50% of our population, actually 51% are women, and 30% are other equity deserving groups, like think of people of color. And so the goal here is to make sure that through our governance, through our management, through our staff, through the people that we invest in, the GPs, that these organizations and their org charts mimic society. And so that all people, irrespective of where they come from or what they look like or whatever, have opportunities. And so our goal is to make sure that we look like the society that we are hoping to serve.
It's a great bridge to our next topic, which is immigration. And you're heavily involved in the issue of immigration with us, in the Business Council, and our task force, but also in the bigger picture nationally. And so, Irfhan, why is this topic so important to you?
So I mentioned earlier that I'm a patriotic Canadian, and I believe that Canada has a huge opportunity to play an impactful role in the world. I think we've lost some of our middle power influence. And so if you want to have the opportunity to export Canadian values of equal opportunity, of inclusion, of embracing the other, of how we as a society are multi-ethnic, I think quite open. These are all things that maybe don't exist in lots of places. I mean, there's a fear of the other. If you look at what's happening in Europe, like in the refugee crisis there and how people are reacting to that, or Brexit, or I mean, it doesn't take long to look at the US and say, wow, that there are cracks in that system. Canada needs to stand up and have influence to try to make the world the type of world that we would like for it to be, which is the society that we're in. If we are going to do that, we will only have the power to do that if our society is successful. If we do not have relative economic prosperity and growth, how do we have a leg to stand on to suggest to others how they should run their society if our society doesn't work? So that gets us to like a very basic thing of like, can we grow GDP and GDP per capita? Partly because it helps our tax base, partly because it helps us then do the social things that we want to do, partly because it gives us the moral authority to have a voice at the table, to maybe influence the world to not be doing some of the things that I think are really scary right now, like the multiple wars, right, in different places. And so how do you do that? GDP is just capital plus labor. And I don't believe that any country can have a true sustainable economic or other advantage on capital. Capital will go anywhere it gets a return. You can wire money to Mongolia or Nigeria or Brazil in a nanosecond if it gets a good enough return, right? Risk adjusted.
Yep.
Labor is sticky. When somebody buys a house, has children, puts their kids in school, they're not going to move very quickly. And so if you can attract and retain the very best labor, very best minds from around the world to Canada, you will absolutely grow GDP. You will absolutely grow GDP per capita. You will grow relative wealth. You'll grow the tax base, which gives us the capital to invest, whether that be in social programs or in our military. And you will have a proof point to say, this is the model of welcoming of the other that actually is differentiated and creates wealth and power, which is why you should look at the Canadian model. So that piece on immigration, to me, is critical. It's not just that we have lots of immigrants. It's who are we attracting? Are we attracting the labor that we need? Are we keeping them here? Are we making them successful? It's not good enough to have a doctor show up in Canada to drive an Uber. It doesn't work. Right? You got to get the people in the right seats on the bus, not just on the bus. So there's a lot there. The onion is very complicated, as you and I know. We've talked about this all the time. But this, to me, if we can keep our welcoming of the other, Canada's the only country welcoming people the way we are right now globally. Like, I can't find another one. If we can keep that and make it even more successful, it is the number one tool in our toolkit for relative economic and social prosperity over the next 100 years.
Couldn't agree more. And you've done a lot of things lately. You were on the Current with Matt Galloway in mid-January, and you and Daniel Bernard, CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, wrote a piece in the Globe last year, really kind of tying a series of these issues and opportunities of our country together in a couple of unique threads. And I think a couple of them you've touched on. One is, A, who are we attracting? Are we attracting the people that we need for the growth and success of our economy? And I think a piece you've touched on is, in previous immigration waves in Canada, we brought in a lot more trades, and we aren't bringing in as many trades right now. The foreign credentials, we have people that are highly skilled and trained in other countries, and they're driving Ubers or pushing brooms, totally underemployed, totally underutilized. If you had a magic wand, these sort of your three key changes that you would make to enable Canada and Alberta to achieve its immigration potential and enable prosperity for those that we're welcoming to the country.
I'm lucky I get three. Thank you. Look at that. You're like a genie.
I am like we're not just the one wish. It's the
I
three.
get three wishes.
Yes.
All right. Well, the first thing that I think we really need to think about is the flexibility on whom we are attracting and to where, right? Like, the economy will change over time, and we need to make sure that our system is changing with it, so that, like, right now we do need a lot of skilled trades. That may not be the case in 7 years. So let's build a system that has the flexibility to ramp up and down for the skills that are required, and then also by location. So I'm a big fan of, like, the immigration system moving more towards, and it has over the last 10 or 20 years moved more towards provincial nominee program, where each province can say, these are the skills that we need here. Because what we need in Alberta, they don't need in PEI, and what they need in Quebec, we don't need here, and BC needs something else, and it may even be even more micro than that. And I think that engaging the provinces in this in the way that they have, I think, is very helpful. We have the tech pilot that we're working on here in Alberta that's really been successful, as an example. And I think the government has moved in that direction and is talking about doing even more. So that's positive, and we just need to get there. The second thing, I think, is we have to really think about credentials. When people come here and we give them points in the system to then come to Canada, get their permanent residency, but then we don't let them practice the thing that we gave them the points for, like, that doesn't make any sense.
Totally.
And I'll give you what the smoking gun is on this one for me, Adam. And I'm probably going to make enemies on this, but I'm sorry. But I think about foreign trained doctors. And I go back to March 2020. Remember when that was the beginning of COVID and we were, like, all trying to flatten the curve, and we're like, oh my God, the medical system is going to be completely overwhelmed. What are we going to do about it? The leading idea was we should let foreign doctors, like, practice to help, like, flatten the curve, right?
Yep.
Sitting there and I'm like, okay, hold on. 2 weeks ago, these doctors, we thought as a society were not qualified to treat diseases that we know everything about, and now they're qualified to treat a disease that we know nothing about. Like, pick a lane. Either these guys are doctors and they understand it, or they're not. Like, just decide. And we have to just recognize that this is not the only place in the world where people are able to be trained at a certain level, right? And there are smart people all over the place. That's why we import these people. Like, the number of people from India and China, otherwise, that we bring in to be technology workers in Canada is, like, massive. So we believe their systems are doing something positive, right? Like, IIT is probably the best tech school in the world. So it's possible to get trained somewhere else and be qualified. My mother actually came as a nurse. She had to recertify here, right? Like, that's what happens. Because she got her degree in a foreign institution in a country called Scotland. She went to the University of Glasgow. And apparently the people that founded this country, their universities aren't good enough to train you to practice as a nurse in this country. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I'd really want us to spend time there. And the third is, we have to figure out the right number of international students. I don't know what the number is. Like, the number is going to be, what do we need in our economy? How many do we already have here? How many are already training? And then the delta is, like, what we need to bring in as foreign students to train, right? But I am worried that we went from 300,000 foreign students to 900,000 foreign students in the last 5 years. That's 600,000 more people that need houses that we don't have, healthcare that is in short supply. Like, that's a problem, and that's where the cracks are, in my opinion. If you have people, if they're training for things we need, fantastic. I'm not convinced of that. The immigration minister 3 or 4 weeks ago called a lot of these strip mall colleges that are offering diplomas to people and things that we don't need, he called them student puppy mills. And so we got to fix that. And so those are my three things. We got to be flexible to what's needed in each region over time. We need to really think about credentialing. Got to figure out what the right number of foreign students is.
I completely agree with your three I would add, my fourth, if I could add to your list, would be
You're the genie. You can do whatever you want.
yes, I'll throw my fourth. And I would say that the other piece is then how do we make sure, in addition to the credential side, how do we make sure immigrants are set up for a prosperous life here? And so key supports in the settlement services side of things. English is a second language. We know that here in Calgary, there are wait lists of up to 1 or 2 years for new immigrants to come and then get into an English training program. You cannot survive and be successful in a country if you don't know the language at a high state of proficiency. And to make them wait a year or two is just simply not acceptable. So we need to be finding ways.
Yeah, we need to know that we can receive them before we bring them. Like, it doesn't work that way. I'll give
Yeah.
you a stat that might blow your mind, Adam. So, like, of the 431,000 people that became permanent residents last year in Canada, 25% of them use settlement services agencies. 75% did not. And it's because they were trained in and they learned English in their university, wherever they went to school, and they're coming with a 6-figure job. And really they just need help sort of figuring out what neighborhood to live in and like how to get their kids into school and the rest of that stuff, right? And that's why, you mentioned the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. I'm the board chair there. We have an app called Canoe, which gives new permanent residents to Canada access to 1,500 cultural institutions across the country for free for a year, so they can integrate and like understand the society that they're in, be part of our community, become civically engaged, become stickier, so that they stay, right? They actually enjoy Canada. And I'll tell you, like, the thing that I'm most proud of Canoe is that one app last year served more newcomers to Canada than every other settlement agency in Canada combined
Seriously.
for less than 1% of the cost.
Wow.
Like, that's super efficient. And sometimes, nonprofits can be more efficient than government. And I think that's a great example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a phenomenal statistic. And, I think that in combination with some real on the ground support once someone is here, but we do need to really.
You need both. And like,
totally.
The wait a year for language, like, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah. It's an and, not an either or scenario. So no, thank you for your work. We're privileged to have you as part of our prosperity driven immigration project. And I know we're gaining so much by having you at that table. So thank you for being.
It's great. It's great work you guys are doing. And I will tell you, this is I would say this even behind your back, but people are noticing the work that the Business Council of Alberta is doing, not just in Alberta, but nationally. It's a real leader. And I know that the work that we're doing on this is on the radar in Ottawa, probably more so than anything else that I think is on the radar for any kind of business organization. So your team is doing exceptional work. You should be proud of it. And I think that hopefully our members are proud of it. And it's good work, not just for Alberta, but for the rest of Canada.
Well, thank you. I'm immensely proud of the team that's working on it. Our manager policy, Alicia Plindenchich, is leading that full steam ahead and just doing a remarkable job. So thank you. Final question, Irfhan, as we wrap, your outlook for Alberta. What's your long-term view for our great province? Are you excited? Are you concerned? Are we headed in the right direction, the wrong direction? How would you summarize your view for Alberta into the future?
It's a big question to end on. I don't think it's an or. I'm both excited and concerned. We're leading the country in migration. Last year, 3.7% population growth. That's a driver of GDP. As long as we get those people into the right jobs with the right skills and the right tools and the right language, that will drive prosperity. That's not surprising. It's correlated with, who's leading the country in economic growth. We are. That's exciting. So there's a lot there that we should be really, really proud of. But I am concerned as well. I think that we have become, as a province, too political, way too political, not pragmatic. And this is a pragmatic place, right? Like, we're entrepreneurs. We're people that want to get things done. Yeah. And I think we can get in our own way with like political rhetoric versus pragmatic action. And so we got to get back to more of that. And frankly, that's all of us as business leaders, demanding that that's how we act and that's how we move forward. And, it's different, right? Because unfortunately, politics is about power, not about profit. And so they want to be elected irrespective of the cost. And, I'm a business person. Let's be more about profit. Let's make it work.
Yeah. No, well said. Well said. Irfhan, anything else you want to leave our listeners with before we thank you for your time here today?
I have nothing else, good sir. You asked great questions. I appreciated the opportunity, and I hope that we have more than one listener. Thank you.
I guarantee you we will. Absolutely. Thanks, Irfhan.
I'll send it to my mother. I'll send it to my mother.
Two, for sure. Yeah. Thanks, Irfhan.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta. You can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. We'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB, that's B-I-Z, Council AB, on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you like this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.